You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea. Medgar Evers.
In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American boy, was lynched in Mississippi after being accused of offending a woman in her family's grocery store. When Emmett Till's mother held open the casket for her son at his funeral, the image of his body became one of the starkest examples of racial violence in America. These lynchings, I think no one can deny, were acts of violence. They were needless, horrendous acts of violence.
When I think of iconic figures during the Civil Rights Movement, one that comes to mind is Mamie Till. She was the mother of Emmett Till. And I think as a parent, the loss of a child is probably one of the most significant losses that a parent could experience. To experience the murder of a child would be even more significant. But to experience the brutal murder of your child is probably one of the most horrific and life-changing events that could ever happen to anyone. And Mamie made a very difficult, gut-wrenching decision, because when we all look at the photos of Emmett Till's body, because she wanted the world to see what had happened to her son, I want to ask her, why did you love your people so much that you were willing to endure great pain to look at your child's body that way? And I think even today, when we say, with all the cellular technology, that the civil rights action and the death and murder of Black citizens is more relevant today because it's been captured. Well, that was captured. We saw, the world saw what happened to Emmett Till. And I think when I look at Mamie Till, and I think that as a mother, she was willing to share that with all of us so that we could see how horrific and how brutal and how inhumane that people had become towards Black citizens. I think she changed a nation, because we then knew just how difficult the civil rights struggle was going to be. And he wasn't the first African American to die. He certainly wasn't the last. That photo showed the cruel inhumanity of people at a time when you just thought, God, could it get any worse? And I wish I could say that after Emmett Till, it didn't get any worse, but it did. That's pretty powerful. In 1917, the NAACP, business community leaders, and the clergy, under the leadership of James Weldon Johnson, formed a committee to protest the extreme violence being waged across the country against Black citizens. On July 28, 1917, 10,000 Black men, women, and children marched in silence up Fifth Avenue in New York in protest of lynchings and other atrocities against Black people. Pictured here are the names of the Silent March Committee. Members of this notable committee included W.E.B. Du Bois, Madam C.J. Walker, and Adam Clayton Powell, Sr.
So my selection was W.E.B. Du Bois. This gentleman was just such an amazing pioneer. I have studied him and studied others, but he seems to stand out amongst a few because he hit the ground running. He was born in the early 1868 era, and obviously very post-slavery, still enduring what would have been considered a lot of racism and a lot of setbacks. But one of the things I enjoyed about him most is that he never seemed to slow down. He just he hit the ground running and really learning quickly that he had to educate himself to really be able to combat some of the challenges for Black people during that time. So Mr. Du Bois finished his education at many different universities, but specifically he was the first African American to graduate from Harvard University. And of course he went on to receive his master's and his PhD at other universities. I just, when I look at him, I can't say enough, because I know that if I put myself into his place and really look at the timing of everything, would I have had the same type of initiatives and motivation to serve in the Black community? So if Mr. Du Bois was sitting here in front of me, my question to him would be, knowing the opposition and all of the things that you would come up against during that era, 1860s through even the early 1900s, and even the mid 1900s for that matter. What inspired you? Where did you get the courage to go against the grain? Where did you find the courage to step up and be that pioneer and really find out, or educate Black people in the era of knowing that this wasn't right? Thank you for what you've done, and thank you to all of the other pioneers. I still, to this day, I'm very fortunate that where I sit now here in Plano, Texas, working at a corporate headquarters for an amazing company is because of people like you who stepped up and demanded equal rights.
4 days into his sudden presidency, and the night before he would address a joint session of the Congress in which he once served, Lyndon Johnson sat around a table with his closest advisors, preparing his remarks to a shattered and grieving nation. He wanted to call on senators and representatives to pass a civil rights bill, the most sweeping since Reconstruction. And most of his staff counseled him against it. They said it was hopeless, that it would anger powerful Southern Democrats and committee chairmen, that it risked derailing the rest of his domestic agenda. And one particularly bold aide said he did not believe a president should spend his time and power on lost causes, however worthy they might be. To which it is said, President Johnson replied, "Well, what the hell's the presidency for?"
My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hatred how this all happened, but it cannot continue.
If I had to think about a civil rights era icon that I admire, that would probably have to be Coretta Scott King. I think to be the spouse of someone as iconic as Dr. Martin Luther King had to be extremely difficult. Over the course of her life, she granted several interviews, and I remember one interview in particular was in the Washington Post, and she expressed frustration with how she had been characterized by Hollywood in some of the movies that basically portrayed her as a prop. And she quoted, and I have the quote, that often I'm made to sound like an attachment to a vacuum cleaner, the wife of Martin, then the widow of Martin, all of which I was proud to be, but I was never just a wife nor a widow. I was always more than a label. If I had to ask her one question, I would ask her, how did she endure what had to be at times just sheer terror regarding the bomb threats and the death threats that were at one point happening on a daily, hourly basis? I mean, this wasn't a childless couple. So to have placed your children in that kind of environment, in that kind of danger, in pursuit of something greater than life itself, had to not only be his dream, that had to be her dream too. The civil rights movement had many dominant male leaders. And typically when you hear about female involvement in the civil rights movement, you always hear the name Rosa Parks. But Coretta Scott King was just as pivotal a character and a force during that movement as Rosa Parks. When I look at photos of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I see Coretta Scott King right by his side. She didn't stay at home saying, I got to worry about the kids, or it's too cold, or it's not safe, or that walk is too long. She was right beside him. And I always admired her for her courage and strength to have so selflessly given over her dear Martin to all of us. And even after his murder, she continued to carry the torch for equality because she knew the struggle wasn't over. And in fact, I'm sure there were those who thought with the death of Dr. King, so would the movement. But she continued to advance the ideas of freedom, equality, self-love, self-determination, all of those values and things that I think that we still struggle for today. And for that, she's indeed someone I admire.
John Lewis is more than Bloody Sunday. He's more than a congressman, a House of Representatives member. He's more than the person who was at Selma. John Lewis, to me, is a movement. John Lewis represented the tip of the spear in the fight for not just racial equality, but against injustice for all people. John Lewis was such a prolific and impactful figure. We would not be where we are today without his sacrifice, his dedication to not just the moments where racial injustice was prevalent, but overall to the movement. The civil rights era had many successes. We all know about the significant legislation that was passed in '64 for civil rights. We know about 1965 for voter rights. But there were failures. So the question that I would ask of John Lewis and other civil rights leaders would be if one of those failures is that even amidst so many successes and in the battle for racial equality amongst all people, yet we are still at a time now where people, many of our neighbors, refuse to recognize that racism is real and it impacts not just one of us, not just some of us, but all of us. It impacts our entire society, either directly or indirectly, because we are all interrelated, we are all interdependent, we are all interconnected. We are all representatives of one another. How do you keep that fire burning? I would like to know those answers from John Lewis, because I believe that he had them. I believe that he showed them in his actions. I believe that he spoke them in his words. And I believe that he committed to them through his deeds.
I picked Mary McLeod Bethune, and I picked Mary McLeod Bethune based on just her sheer tenacity and perseverance, and how if I could only be that tenacious and that persevering. Mary McLeod Bethune is a woman, or was a woman, who was born to parents who had been enslaved, and she learned to read based on, and I'm going to call it a challenge, from a white child who basically told her that she'd never be able to read, or she couldn't read. And she took that as a challenge, and that kind of started her whole journey towards learning, towards that sense of inquiry, and then understanding that whole thing, this thing called reading and education, how it could be used to uplift the African American, to put them in a position of self-reliance and self-determination. And she understood this. She understood it to the point of was so focused on it and what it meant for not just her, but for her people, that she was able to found a school, Bethune College, which later became Bethune-Cookman. She then founded a hospital in Daytona. She served within the cabinet of Franklin Roosevelt and had the ear of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a womanist and stood side by side with white women for the rights of women, the right to vote during the suffrage movement. She founded the National Council of Negro Women, and she had to navigate in such a way that she had to use those funds of white folk, to build her school, to build the hospital, to build the communities, to send other children, African American children, to school. She had to depend on those white dollars to make these things happen. So my question to her would be, how do you create an ally with people that have done everything, it seems, in their power to work against you as a collective group of people? How do you single out and create the ally, that relationship with a small group of people? And you have to trust. And so that becomes my issue. I'm not there with the whole trust thing. And again, because of what I have personally experienced and witnessed, the microaggressions, and for her it was beyond micro. I mean, I'm sure it was just out and out, blatant, because of the times, blatant racism. But how was she able to create these allies and these relationships, which had to involve some degree of trust, and move on, even when those that she thought she was the ally with proved not to be allies after all. And I think of like being a womanist in the suffrage movement, and you're standing side by side with these white women, and you think you're on one accord. We're all fighting for the same thing, and that's for the rights of women, and specifically for their right to vote. And these women, who I'm sure recognized that she managed to have, you know, this sphere of influence as it relates to dignitaries and specifically to the Roosevelts, they wanted her on their team, right? And so again, she's thinking we're all fighting for the same thing. But when the rubber met the road, they let her know, no, we're not talking about equality in that you as a Black woman, you are equal to me as a white woman. We're not talking about equality like that. No. And then them giving up their privilege and power, or just sharing their privilege and power, just using their privilege and power to help Black women, she then realized that that's not what these women are really about. And in that moment, it did become an us and a them, or a we and a them, not an us, not us as women working together. So how was she able to overcome that? Because see, to me, that would feel like straight up betrayal.
So someone that I look up to and would absolutely ask a question if I had someone from the civil rights era would be James Baldwin. I admire so much of what he said in interviews and debates, and I've read several of his books, and he is someone that it's so interesting. I find that he's often saying things that I feel, but maybe didn't put into words. And one of the things he brought up in his book, The Fire Next Time, he talks about how, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says that it's hard as a Black person in America, and maybe even anywhere, but it's hard as a Black person to give certain people the benefit of the doubt. He says that the way that he explains it is doing that could cost us our lives. So trusting people that we are supposed to trust, but that we as Black people feel that we just can't. And so when I think of this, I think about the relationship with police in the Black community, and how the trust and the communication, the relationship is just so strained. I think for myself, if I were in trouble and really needed help, who would I call? You of course think to call the police, but there's this fear that even though I'm the victim, I could be brutalized. I could be seen as the aggressor, or as the bad guy. And he talks about that in his book, The Fire Next Time. And one of the things that he says, how he dealt with it, is he had to intimidate them before they intimidated him. And I'm not sure what he meant by that. And I would, I would ask him to elaborate on that. But one of the things I think, just from his experience and how he's talked about being beaten by police officers, and how we still see this going on today, and knowing that the relationship is still strained, it's hard to it's hard to not be jaded. It's hard to hear all the things about police brutality and about another unarmed Black man or woman being murdered by the police, and it's hard to hear that and still have that trust, but also it's hard to hear that and not be jaded. It's hard to hear that and still have hope that things will change, that things will get better, that they will see us and recognize us as people, and respect that. So I would really like to ask him, how does he keep from being jaded, and how does he think we all, what we can do, or how we can keep that hope and that faith and that belief that things are going to change. How does he see that happening for us?
No fascist USA! No fascist USA!
Tab Talks wants to thank advertiser YesI'mADiva.com. Their mission is to uplift, empower, and celebrate women of faith. In addition to their sassy bling custom tees, they have books, stationery, accessories, and more. You can follow YesI'mADiva.com on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We can continue to tell stories that inspire and enlighten. Please go to www.thefield.org and select the Donations tab. Enter Tabs Talks, and you'll see Dr. Michelle Pierce Mobley's name as the artist. Just use that portal to process your donation. Your donation is tax deductible and matching gift program eligible.